Come back here! But wait till I catch you! I'll kick your ass! Yeah, don't mind him. He's just a grade 9 kid. I love the little bastard. Hell, I left my cigarettes in my old coat. I only wear this black coat for state occasions, like meetings with the Archbishop and to welcome new classes. Hi, gang.
Hi there.
Welcome to Notre Dame. Now, I do this every year, you know. I welcome students in the Bachelor of Arts program. But this year is a special occasion. We have lived with hand-me-down wooden shacks for 25 years, but in this year of our Lord, 1957, the Russians put up a Sputnik. We put up Varsity Hall. First brick building on our campus. Now, Varsity Hall will be your community center, also your dining hall. I thought you'd be interested in that one. We finally got it out of the church basement. Yep. When you come to meals here, you don't stop learning. I believe, along with the ancient Greeks, there's great creativity in fellowship over a meal. Now, you'll often have a speaker at meals. Me. I might talk about a show I've seen, or a book I've read, or hockey, or Socrates. Whatever ideas I toss out, you should explore in fellowship. Now, I want to show you something. This thing here, this is the Notre Dame crest. Now, I chose the motto, Lector et emergo. Lector et emergo. Now, it loses a lot of zing in translation. Nothing translates exactly into another language. But in English, it comes out, struggle and come through. Struggle and come through. Lector et emergo. Now, about the shield. This thing in here, this is a lion rampant. Now, the lion rampant has the spirit of Notre Dame. He's waving his paws around and yelling, I can lick any lion in the house. So why do you suppose Notre Dame teams are called hounds? Why not the lions? Well, there's a story about that. It's a true story. When I first came to Wilcox, there was a hockey game where our brave lads were playing like a gang of hippos. They weren't skating. They weren't checking. Oh, they were making brilliant passes to the other team. Now, as their suffering coach, I was trying to exhort them to greater things. Thought of all kinds of descriptive words to call them, but well, ladies and little kids were present, so before I knew it, I was shouting, skate, you hounds! Skate! Well, they got their game together, and from then on, we were known as the Notre Dame Hounds. I suppose if I'd have thought of it beforehand, I'd have realized that the Hound sets a good example for our teams. They make as much noise as lions, and they never quit. And that's the big point. They never give up. You know, the Hound is a symbol of one of the most beautiful poems in the English language. The one that begins, I fled him down the nights and down the days. I fled him down the arches of the years. Now, the poet, Francis Thompson, was a guy who was on the run most of his life, looking for satisfaction in the things of this world. But the Hound of Heaven, representing the love of Almighty God, was always there, following, and never gave up. Now, another thing about hounds, they're tough. Now, you've got to be tough because life is tough. One night, we were going out of town to a playoff game. And when the hounds were getting in the truck, I noticed that 3 guys were missing. So I go to their shack. And I find them in bed. And they wailed, oh, Pear, we can't play. We've got the measles. Well, I roared, get up, you hounds. If you can't beat them, at least you can give them measles. You know, my great loves after God are Canada, hockey, and my students. Some well-meaning soul once told me that we put too much emphasis on sports, but I tell them that sports help so much because we Canadians are timid. We're afraid to speak up. I also tell them, damn it, Notre Dame didn't start as a school. It started as a boys' athletic club. You see, that's the way the ancient Greeks approached education. Among the nations of antiquity, Greece was unique in her attitude towards physical exercise and bodily training. The word athletics comes from an ancient Greek word meaning contest. Now, athletics in ancient Greece did not consist merely of physical exercise for the sheer enjoyment of play, no, but the spirit of competition and the desire for perfection of performance, which can be achieved only through untiring effort. Now, our program is a logical progression from athletics through education. History, language, philosophy, bringing a student to the inescapable reality that there is order in the universe, a plan designed by a supreme being. Now, at Notre Dame, you are free to pursue this supreme being in your own way. And I don't give a damn what religion a guy belongs to. There is a God. And I don't much care if you're Christian, Mohammedan, or Jew, as long as you believe in him. Now, some of you may know that I get to speak at sportsmen's dinners all over Canada. And often I'm asked to do grace. And that's my chance to say, all right, you Protestant bastards, now you get to do it my way. But later, over hockey stories, I push the spirit of Notre Dame. Hell, gang, we're all in this together. Let's not fight each other. Let's work together like brothers. Now, it may surprise some of you to know that I come from a long line of Presbyterians. Yep, the Murrays were Scottish and Presbyterian and proud to be both. My father was Presbyterian till he fell in love with a lady named Nano Hayes. Miss Hayes thought my father was the answer to a maiden's prayer. But he wasn't Catholic, and unless he did something about that, well, she couldn't marry him. As a result of their marriage, there were 6 new Catholics in the world. I was number 6. You know, it's often said that there are a lot of advantages to growing up poor. It instills character in a person. But unfortunately for my character, the Murrays were not poor. And my grandfather was one of 8 brothers who left Scotland to make their fortunes in the New World. And grandfather made his in Toronto in the retail trade. Now, his big rival was Timothy Eaton. Damned Irishman. You see, Timothy Eaton believed in cash. He trusted in cash. My grandfather ran a credit store. He trusted in people. Now, that was grandfather's idea of how to run a business. See, at Notre Dame, we stress the importance of the idea. Do you know that the human brain, with its capacity for ideas, is the most powerful force in the universe? If you learn nothing else at Notre Dame, your time will not be wasted here. Now, grandfather's idea of credit was popular in Toronto, but he had another idea that wasn't so popular. He believed that Canada was bound to become a bilingual nation. And if a man was to succeed, he had to learn to work in both English and French. Now, my father, James Peter Murray, made his own fortune in carpets. But you see, the Murrays believed there was more to life than business. His father was a founder of the Argonauts Rowing Club. Well, rowing used to be a big sport in Canada. I wish we had it here, if we could find someone to build us a lake. There's not enough water around Wilcox to float a breadboard. And what there is isn't fit to drink or cook with. Now, they pipe it in now. But before, it had to come in tanker trucks, 10 miles from Rollo. And we had a big cistern without a pump, so the gang had to hoist water a pail at a time, and you can bet on that system they didn't waste a lot. Well, there I go off on another tangent. You know, old hounds tell me I'm always going off on tangents. Anyway, My father's Argonauts rowing club branched out into other sports, including football, and that team became the Argonauts of today. Now, about not growing up poor. The Murrays had money and family connections. Aunt Jenny was married to a son of Sir John A. Macdonald, the first Prime Minister of Canada. Now, I was used to being around important people like Pauline Johnson, the wonderful Canadian Indian poet. Now, the Murrays were patrons of the arts. Father was helped found the Ontario College of Art. And Pauline Johnson would stay with us whenever she was in Toronto. You should all be familiar with her great Canadian classic, the song My Paddle Sings. Yeah. Her brother, Alan, a grand guy, a lawyer in Toronto, taught me how to paddle a canoe. Now, when I was 5 years old, I remember my father took me to Nova Scotia, and we went calling on our next-door neighbor, Alexander Graham Bell. I remember sitting on the knees of the inventor of the telephone while his great mind churned over some new idea. Now, when I was 7 years old and it was time for me to go to school, my father took the advice of my grandfather, and I was educated in Quebec, finishing at Laval. God, Laval was exciting. The oratory, the debates, it had a profound influence on my life. I learned to read and speak French and exchange ideas in French. And I met some of the grandest guys in Canada. Sir Wilfrid Laurier, when he was Prime Minister, used to visit Laval. Now, in 1910, I had to put my classical education to work. And I loved writing, and I got a job as a reporter on the Toronto Star. I worked under Bill Hewitt, father of Foster Hewitt. Now, as the only guy in the newsroom who understood French, I got some nice assignments back to Quebec, and it was all great fun, but somehow I wasn't satisfied. You see, I was looking for something, and it wasn't in a newsroom. Maybe it was in a law office. You see, it seemed to me that a lawyer could stand on his feet and project ideas. And one of the great orators of my time, Sir Wilfrid Laurier, the greatest of them all, was a lawyer. Well, I registered at Osgoode Hall at the University of Toronto, and through family connections got a job clerking in the office of J.J. Robinett. Now, there's a million stories about J.J. Robinett, one of the great courtroom actors, always up to some damn fool stunt. Now, I had bit parts in some of his stunts. One time he was defending a guy accused of rape. And I was at the defense table with him. And when I got a nod, I was to knock an inkstand off the table. Well, I got the nod. And off went the inkstand. And a guy in the back of the courtroom threw a fit of hysterics. Well, I realized he was just another stooge. But I was curious about it, just as you are. So later I said, Mr. Robinett, what the hell was that all about? He said, well, it was so obvious. He said it was to distract the jury. You see, when you notice the jury hanging on every word of the prosecutor, you have to turn their thoughts elsewhere. Well, I don't remember how that case turned out, but when court resumed that afternoon, that jury was miles away. Well, I loved Robinett, and the courtroom drama, and the study of law with its roots in English and Roman history. But I was having second thoughts. You see, there didn't seem to be much connection between the law and justice, particularly for those who couldn't afford it. The study of the law was interesting, but there was this yearning at the back of my brain to find something else. And where do you suppose I found it? In church? No. Hit by lightning? No. Excuse me, every visitor gets to hear this story even if they've heard it before? No, it happened on a hot July day on Yonge Street. I came to a second-hand bookstore, And there in the window was this little battered book for 10 cents. The Confessions of St. Augustine. And on the flyleaf, in French, beautifully handwritten, it said that the book had belonged to Archbishop Ock, Archbishop of Paris, who died on the barricades in 1848, and the book had fallen from his pocket when he fell. Well, I stood and read in Latin, and I came to a line which impressed me very much. To him who does what in him lies, God will not deny his grace. To him who does what in him lies, God will not deny his grace. Well, that hit me. St. Augustine made it clear that I'd been going about my search in the wrong way. I was looking outside. He said, look inside. Well, right away, I grabbed a trolley and went to see the old archbishop and asked him if he would let me in his seminary. Well, his grace was agreeable, and he was building a new seminary, and it was named, of all people, for St. Augustine. Now, St. Augustine was a guy who could very easily have gone very wrong. Oh, he was a rotten youth. Now, once when he was 16, he got sick and thought he was dying, and he agreed to be baptized. But when he recovered, he reneged and went back to being a rotten youth. Now, I'd have kicked his ass, but his mother, St. Monica, prayed for him, just as yours would. When he grew up, he was a rotten common law husband and wasted his great brain on all kinds of foolishness. But you see, God was just giving him plenty of line. When he was 33 years old, God reeled him in and said, all right, lad, the fun's over. I've got work for you. Now, it had been over 300 years since our blessed Lord ascended to heaven, and there was no one around to tell what the apostles meant when they went forth to teach all nations. The Christian church had grown as an underground movement in little pockets all over the place. Theology was all over the place, too. Augustine's job was to bring order to this jumble of ideas. Now, two great books contain his thoughts: The City of God and the Confessions. He still speaks to us today. Now, in that bookstore on Yonge Street, he was speaking to me and to you. To him who does what in him lies, God will not deny his grace. Ever since, he's been my constant companion. The old fellow has stood beside me over the years, and I have worked like blazes for his idea of the city of God here in Wilcox as pastor of St. Augustine's Church. Now, for 5 years, I worked in various parishes throughout Ontario. At Aurelia, I helped erect a statue to a boyhood hero, Champlain. Then on to Penetanguishene, mission territory of more boyhood heroes, Brebeuf and the Jesuit martyrs. Now, one day I got a call from my archbishop, and he said, Archbishop Mathieu is coming from Regina to recruit nuns for the West. I want you to borrow your brother-in-law's car and chauffeur for a couple of days and entertain him. Well, my brother-in-law isn't Catholic, but that didn't let him off the hook when my boss wanted his chauffeur. Well, Archbishop Mathieu was a grand guy. And we had a wonderful time in French. Now, he was rector of my old university, Laval. The upshot of this visit was that he asked me to come to Regina and be his chancellor. Now, my old archbishop didn't seem unhappy to see me go. And soon I was on a train headed for my first look at the West. Now, passing the rocks and little Christmas trees of northern Ontario, I had a whole day to think about this great country. Now, we are told that 95% of Canada can't grow anything, that it can't be developed. But I tell you, there is no country in the world so blessed with natural resources, such great potential as Canada. All we need is great individuals. At Notre Dame, we challenge each of you to be great. Everyone is insignificant until you yourself make you great. Wow. Now, Archbishop Mathieu gave me a warm welcome. And I remember we had a good laugh over a letter he'd received from my old boss. It started, "Your Grace, Athol Murray is due to arrive in Regina soon, with my blessings. Now, he's a bright young man, and he talks too much, but he should mature with age." Well, I landed in Regina in the middle of a big commotion, having to do with the parish bazaar at the cathedral. The Ladies' Aid, in preparation for the event, had ordered in a big load of cigarettes and pop and candy, and the stuff had arrived the afternoon before, and they stacked it in plain view in a window. Well, the inevitable happened. A dozen kids, including the son of the mayor of Regina, climbed through the window and helped themselves. It was an ecumenical break-in. I mean, Catholic and Protestant youth were involved in this adventure. Well, there was a lot of noise about it. The parents offered to pay for the loot, but the rector, Father Healy, was determined to press charges. You see, he's a grand guy, Father Healy. Grand guy, but a little hot-headed. He's an Irishman, you see. He was mad about a book that said most delinquents were Catholic, and he was bound and determined that he was going to show that Protestants could be just as delinquent. Blessed are the peacemakers. I made a deal. The charges would be dropped, and I would marshal the delinquents and take them over to apologize to the Archbishop. Now, the Archbishop received the penitents in his billiard room. Well, he was handy with a cue. Must have misspent some of his youth in pool halls. When it was all over, it was the end of the big commotion. Everybody shook hands. But it was the beginning of something else. See, it had brought this mixed bunch of kids together in the Archbishop's billiard room. I found myself telling this gang about my intense love for Canada, and how my father had been a founder of the Argonauts Rowing Club, and how their motto was, "Pull together." Pull together. No greater motto for young people living in Regina. Well, I should have stopped then, but I kept on going. I was telling them, I know how young people love sports. We'll rent a clubhouse, and we'll go in for hockey and lacrosse and baseball and football. And we won't talk up religion that much. Well, we did all that. And the Argonauts grew to 100 kids. And we played exhibitions and tournaments all over the prairies. I even took a baseball team on a tour of Ontario and Quebec one summer. And if you think 3 is a crowd, try 15 baseball players and 2 cars. Now, I know you'll find this hard to believe, but the Argos Athletic Club was the start of Notre Dame. The Argos were step 1. So let's move on to step 2. In 1927, I was appointed parish priest at Wilcox. Well, I went around saying goodbye to all the Argos, and damned if 15 of the boys didn't say they were coming with me. We'd made money at hockey exhibitions and ball tours, and they wanted to keep on doing it. Well, strangely, it turned out to be physically possible. The parish house was the biggest in town. It had belonged to a prosperous merchant in the early days. Now, it had a glassed-in veranda on 2 sides and a big stable behind. Wilcox is only about 30 miles from Regina, and the parents were all willing, though they weren't all Catholic. Well, now the boys scrounged old lumber and hammered up bunks in every spare corner. And they pitched in on housekeeping and kitchen duties, and for a bachelor establishment, it wasn't bad. Well, no worse than a railroad construction camp. Now, there were plenty of old broken-down trucks around, and I got one to take us to games. And the gang built a box on the flatbed, and they called it the dog house. Now, we often slept in the dog house. I had to find somebody else to drive the thing, though. For some damn reason, I never got the hang of driving an automobile. Now, summer and winter we'd go as far as Alberta and Manitoba with the doghouse. But all play and no work makes a young fellow just as dull as all work and no play. I made the boys read the great books and discuss and debate the ideas. Now, most of these guys had finished high school, but some of them hadn't. And just at this moment, the nuns who ran the elementary school in Wilcox were opening a high school, a one-room high school in a vacant furniture store, and make a note of the name that the sisters had chosen for their high school. It was Notre Dame. Now on to step 3. The Depression came on us without warning. The rains dried up, and farmers had no wheat to sell, and no markets for it if they did. But young men couldn't stop growing up. And because of the Depression, a lot of kids lost their hope of high school. But in my travels with the teens, everywhere we went, I talked up education. Word got around about this crazy priest in Wilcox that could help a boy get an education if he was willing to work hard and put up with primitive living. I was always aware of the fleeting idealism of a boy or a girl. Now, I say fleeting because if you catch it at just the right moment, you can sweep them on to great, great achievement. But it must be caught. You've got to drive into their heads what they can do with their spiritual potential. And this place is dedicated. Now, I'm not talking religion. I'm talking the spiritual. In 1930, I was getting letters. I wrote back, sure, come one, come all. But bring your own blankets, add a towel. Until I'd counted them up, I'd accepted 75 kids for Notre Dame High School. The year before, there'd only been 15. The parish didn't even own the school. It was run by the Sisters of St. Louis. Now, as you might imagine, I was wondering what the principal would say about this mob I'd invited. I needn't have worried. See, much of the credit which is given me for the accomplishments of Notre Dame is really due Mother Edith. Now, I fear no man, but Mother Edith, it was marvelous how that tiny woman could intimidate those great big boys. You see, the history of Notre Dame can't be understood without knowing the part played by that tiny Irish girl that grew up in the Gaspé Peninsula of Quebec. Mother Edith was the quarterback of Notre Dame. She wasn't fazed by my gang. Right away, she put the boys to work converting that vacant furniture store into a 4-room schoolhouse. So far, so good. Now, where do I put this gang? Well, the answer turned out to be every vacant building in town. There was an abandoned Chinese cafe on the main street, and we took that over. And a vacant 2-story bank, we got that. Now, the boys were told to expect a Spartan existence. We couldn't offer them a bathtub or a shower or running water of any kind, but that didn't bother Saskatchewan farm boys. It was the only lifestyle they knew. They could make a home of anything with 4 walls and a roof. You know, apples came in wooden crates those days, and apple boxes made furniture. They also made firewood. In fact, in any long cold snap, any tree or fence in Wilcox could wind up as firewood. But even the town's wooden sidewalks weren't safe. So on to the next problem. How do we feed this mob? Well, for starters, we converted the church basement into a dining hall, and I assigned the boys jobs working in the kitchen, and I hired a cook, an ex-prize fighter. Now, I didn't get any help from the church or the government, and I didn't ask for any. The minute they give you money, they tell you how to spend it. The boys were supposed to pay $18 a month. That didn't happen very often. We accepted farm vegetables in lieu of cash, and I made a deal with Charlie Becker. Oh, he's a grand guy. The Charlie Becker had the grocery store, and he offered us $100 credit. Now, when we reached the limit, he'd cut us off. And when we paid the 100, we could start again. Well, I spent most of my time chasing that 100 and doing a hell of a lot of praying. tell you how hungry my gang was. Their idea of an Epicurean feast was a porridge feed. Yeah. Maybe half a dozen guys would get together of an evening and scrape up 30 cents to buy a package of rolled oats and a pound of sugar. Now they'd take this mess and with a half gallon of milk, mix it all up into a pail and cook it up on a pot-bellied stove. Oh, with a porridge feed in them, they'd go to sleep all smiles. Now about that milk. You know, I'm pretty sure that none of my guys ever rustled cattle, but I'm just as sure that they rustled some of that milk. I mean, they were farm boys. If they found a barn containing a cow, well, they'd know what to do with it. If they had a nickel, they could always get a half gallon from the farm of Nick and Don Metz, two of our hounds. The Metz brothers went on to play for the Toronto Maple Leafs. We sent the Leafs defenseman, too, a young fellow by the name of Garth Bush. Now, he was a typical farm boy. Very inventive with machinery. Oh, he could make our old truck go. You know, in hockey season, we'd push that truck out of a lot of snowdrifts. Talk about luctor et emergo. We struggled, but we got out. Now, often I didn't know where our next meal was coming from. At one point, we were down to toast and coffee. Nobody complained, of course, but as I looked down that long table, I suddenly said, gang, this has gone far enough. I want you to stand up, all of you. We're going to pray. Well, I raised my eyes to heaven. I closed my eyes, and I said, Dear Lord, you got to forgive me, but my poor little bastards are starving. You just got to help us. Next day, an envelope arrived from Toronto. Maple Leaf Gardens. Check from Connie Smythe. $500. Sometimes I think God was laughing at us. I'll tell you about the big turkey. Now, one Christmas, people gave us turkeys till we just couldn't eat anymore. And then somebody brought one in that was 35 pounds, all wrapped up in burlap. Well, I took that turkey and I set it on the veranda. And I forgot about it. Well, 3 months later, the guys came to me and they said, Pear, we're overdrawn at the store. We can't get any meat tonight. We've got the gang to feed. What are we going to do? Well, I'm sitting and looking out the window, and there on the veranda is this great big frozen turkey. My, what a feed we had that night. I'm sure God was laughing at us. And I'm sure he had a good laugh about the Brussels sprouts. You see, we used to get windfalls from wholesales in Regina, and one of them must have gotten stuck with a trainload of Brussels sprouts. Oh, we had those little cabbages till they were coming out our ears. And finally, the boys rebelled and used them for ammunition. Well, you would think that Notre Dame High School would be enough trouble for any sensible man. But I went looking for more. I could see that we had to extend the high school to Notre Dame College. Step 4 was an obligation to the young people of the district who had the talent for an advanced education in the liberal arts. They were already getting history and philosophy at a college level from me. I'd go into the classrooms and I'd give the boys great books to read. And I'd have them discuss the ideas and write essays. Now, I got the impression that the nuns weren't too happy with my butting in, and the distinct impression that they didn't approve the moral tone of some of the books. But you see, my idea of Notre Dame College wasn't new. It began with the ancient Greeks, who held that true education could be found in sports and games, in mastery of the body, in friendly dispute and debate, the conversations of wise and prudent men and women, in music, in random books, in pictures and plays and movies. Well, the Greeks didn't have movies. We're lucky. Oh, I love the movies. And sometimes I entertain at meals, telling the whole story of some show, acting out all the parts with sound effects. One day I think we'll take a long lunch hour and do Gone with the Wind. You know, we couldn't offer this gang any dreaming spires, or halls of ivy, or even a college campus, except for the main street of Wilcox. But we could offer them a true education if we could get affiliated with a degree-granting university. Now, naturally, I tried the University of Saskatchewan, and they said no. Actually, what they said was, it's against provincial law. Well, they showed me the law. It was true. Students had to be resident at the Saskatoon campus. Well, for those young people that needed help, that was out of the question. So I went to the University of Manitoba, and they said no. I went to my alma mater, Laval, and they said no. Then I went to the University of Ottawa, and they said no. But the University of Ottawa made a mistake. You see, I'd learned a few tricks in my undistinguished career with J.J. Robinette. If you just tell a man no, that's the end of it. But if you give him reasons, you give him an opening. Now at Ottawa, they made the mistake of telling me they already had an affiliation with College Mathieu at Gravelbourg, so they didn't need another one in Saskatchewan. Oh, yes, I said. College Mathieu is surely the gem of the prairies. You should be proud to call such a grand school your affiliate. But College Mathieu is a French-speaking institution. And the great University of Ottawa is rooted in the spirit of bilingualism, as is the spirit of this great country. Oh, I really laid it on about my grandfather, the Scottish immigrant, who recognized the partnership between two cultures. All right, they said. You develop an institution equal to College Mathieu, and we'll think about it. Well, naturally, they thought they'd gotten rid of me. But they had made the mistake of telling me exactly the standards that I had to measure up to. It wouldn't be easy. No, College Mathieu had been founded in the early days by the great missionary order, the Oblates of Mary Immaculate. And the Oblates had financial resources in Eastern Canada and France, and influence in church politics. Well, naturally, I thought the best way to be like College Mathieu was to steal their greatest mind. And that was Denis Solaires. I'd met Denis on my travels with the Hounds. You see, our hockey and baseball teams travel 8,000 miles a year. Denis was Belgian, and he had advanced degrees from Louvain and Paris. He was professor of history, philosophy, Greek and Latin classics, fluent in several languages, living and dead. I offered Denis an opportunity, not a job, an opportunity, to live in Wilcox and create an oasis of culture and intellectualism in the dried-out desolation of the once prosperous wheat belt. Who could refuse an offer like that? Denis was the cornerstone of our academic staff. He would teach philosophy and the classics. I would teach logic, metaphysics, and modern history, and Mother Edith, God bless her, was qualified to teach English. I put her down as head of the department. Father O'Donnell, a graduate of Maynooth Seminary in Ireland, would come down from Regina and teach mathematics. Now, we had an academic staff of 7 and a student body of 11, 3 boys and 8 girls. And on September 20th, 1933, I put it all down in a letter to the University of Ottawa and prayed like hell. And in 6 days, our answer was in the village post office. Affiliation would be granted, we would teach their curriculum, and tests would be marked in Ottawa. And a few days later, I welcomed our first class just as I'm welcoming you today. Now, how I was going to pay for the college, God only knew, but day and night I would be reminding him of the little bookstore on Yonge Street And the words of St. Augustine, to him who does what in him lies, God will not deny his grace. Well, God did not deny his grace. And as I welcome you today, we have 50 young people in the degree program and over 300 in the elementary and senior high grades. I get heated up just thinking about it. Now, if it's all right with you people, I'll just slide out of this black clerical coat. The nuns, God bless them, keep my coat looking respectable. Oh, I guess I should tell you about the spam. A few months ago, my pal, John Diefenbaker, was elected Prime Minister of Canada. Yeah, I told Dief, we need food. Dief said, I'll send you some. Well, a few days later, I got a call from the station. And Perry, you better get down here. We've got a freight train consigned to you from your pal, Diefenbaker. It's all spam. Now, because of these farm subsidies, the government has millions of pounds of spare butter in storage and canned pork and God knows what else. Well, Diefenbaker found a mountain of spam someplace. Oh, we've got thousands of shiny little cans of that stuff. You people won't be able to eat it all. And don't you turn up your nose at spam. We used to live on bologna. Where was I? Oh, yes, about the other Notre Dame. You know, we used to have football from there. Now, I used to correspond with their famous coach, Newt Rockne. And one year, Rockne sent us a genuine Notre Dame football, signed by every member of the team. Oh, weren't we proud of that ball? We treated it like a holy relic of a saint. Even built a shrine for it in a glass case. One day, we had to make a terrible decision. It was the only ball we had. We had to take it out of the case and use it. Well, it got rolled on and kicked, and the famous autographs got scuffed off, and it wound up wrecked. You know, our girls used to be part of those teams. Most people didn't know that we had girls, but there were always some from the village and the convent. And they'd keep the Hounds' uniforms going. You see, our equipment was old when we got it, and games were hard on it. Now, after a game, we'd take a box of remnants over to the convent, and the girls would patch the pants and the shirts and sew up the rips to fight another day. Damn Protestant teeth. That's better. Now then, I write about a dozen letters a day on this old Underwood typewriter I've got here. And most of them are about money, asking for it or thanking people for it. But in my spare time, for relaxation, I write to people that I want to share ideas with. Now, Newt Rockne was one of them. And Rex Beach was another. Now, we owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to this great American writer. You see, Rex Beach wrote slam-bang adventure novels about the Klondike Gold Rush. He'd been there like Jack London and Robert W. Service. Well, I guess I made our adventures to hockey games on outdoor rinks at 30 below on a flatbed truck sound like a Klondike adventure. Anyway, Rex came to visit. And he gave us an article in Cosmopolitan magazine, 3,000 words. Miracle College of Saskatchewan. Now, because of that article, we got international attention and checks in the mail. And when he died 8 years ago, Rex left us $100,000, half his estate. This is FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Now, Roosevelt was a great president, a grand fella, but he was a socialist. Now, socialism I totally loathe. Socialism dwarfs the human spirit. It kills the creative fire of the individual. You take Tommy Douglas, for instance. Everybody loves Tommy. Tommy's a grand little guy. But damn it, the man's a socialist. This next fellow is Winston Churchill. He's one of the grander guys. You know, I got a letter from him in the wilderness years when nobody would listen to him. And this great man told me that he thought his life was over. But he didn't give up. You see, you never give up. Now, this is a great American president, Eisenhower. And we talk on the telephone. I'll tell you a story. One of our hounds was in New York recently on a bit of a holiday, and he happened to meet the co-pilot of Air Force One, the president's private plane. The pilot looked at him and he said, "So, you're from Canada." He said, "There's this crazy priest up there in Saskatchewan has Ike taking cold showers for his arthritis." You know, when I was a boy in the workshop of Alexander Graham Bell, I never dreamed for a moment that one day I would be able to pick up a telephone and talk to the President of the United States. Or to Bing Crosby. And believe me, it's easier to talk to the President than it is to Bing Crosby. But one of my pals is head of Famous Players Canada, and he sends me telephone numbers that you won't find in a phone book. Now, Bing sends money. And so does Jimmy Durante. That's a grand fellow, Jimmy. This fellow here is R.B. Bennett. R.B. Bennett had the bad luck of being the Prime Minister of Canada during the worst of the Depression. And the cartoonists had him with a top hat on and striped pants and carrying a satchel with dollar signs on it. But you know, not a month went by that R.B. didn't send us his personal check for $50. Over on the other side here, the fellow with the hat and all the hair, that's Grey Owl. Now, Grey Owl shows you the power of an idea. Here's this Englishman, a little fella by the name of Charlie Bellany. Got it in his head that he wanted to be a Canadian Indian, and he pulled it off. The Indians accepted him as Grey Owl, and his books about life in the woods are genuine. They're in the library. Oh, speaking of our library, we have one of the 10 best libraries in Canada. Now, this is an incunabulum. Well, I can see none of this crew knows what an incunabulum is. That's shocking. An incunabulum is a book that was written with movable type. Now, movable type was only invented in 1450 or so. We have almost 500 incunabula in our library. Now, I'll be reading to you from these great books at mealtimes. How we collected our library is a story. Each book is a story. Now, you can all read these books anytime you want. But if you're like any other class, you probably won't spend enough time in the library. Now, this next fellow is my friend Nick Pappas. And Nick has the Balmoral Cafe in Regina. The Balmoral is the official cafe of the Notre Dame Hounds. We don't have to pay. Now, down in the lower left there, that's my friend Fred Hill. Fred and I have been friends since he was 5 years old. And Fred didn't have the benefit of a Notre Dame education. His parents could afford to send him to Harvard. And I see you've heard of Harvard. Now, I've had many a good meal at the Hills. On Sundays, I'd come in from Wilcox wearing my old buffalo coat there. It had been discarded by the Regina police force. It came in handy at those outdoor hockey games. I always thought that coat was kind of stylish, what with that aviator's helmet I wear with it, but Fred's mother didn't think so. One Sunday, she met me at the door and she said, "Per, you look like a bum." Well, the Hills were longtime good friends of Notre Dame, and I have a feeling that Fred's going to be a good friend for a long time to come yet. Well, you know, my old archbishop once told me I talk too much. But I don't think I'd ever win a shootout with that next fella. That's Bill Hunter. Now, in 1938, this tough redhead showed up at my office. I didn't know he was coming. Neither did his parents. Now, Bill told me that he'd seen our baseball and hockey teams play in Saskatoon, and he got it into his head that he had to finish high school at Notre Dame and be a hound. Well, as it happened, I knew Fred's father. He was president of the senior hockey team in Saskatchewan and had a big job with the post office that meant he could pay, and that was interesting. Well, Bill showed me right away that God had given him a natural talent for organizing sports. He was manager of our hockey, baseball, and football teams. The very next summer, he asked if he could take a ball team on a tour of Western Canada. Well, he's only 18 years old, but why not? I loaned him our old panel truck with the benches in the back, and he hit the road with a banner reading Father Murray's famous Notre Dame Hounds on Tour. The Little Muckers played 87 games that summer, challenging local teams and passing the hat. Their biggest payday was $125 at a tournament. The next summer, Bill was on his way to Europe to fly Spitfires. He dropped in to see me last week. Yep. He said he was going to bring Major League Hockey to Western Canada. It seems like a long shot, but when Wild Bill Hunter gets an idea, anything can happen. Now, you know, people wonder about that next picture. Hitler. What the hell is he doing there? Well, I'll tell you. I keep that picture to remind me that bad ideas can be just as powerful as good ones. Do you know that we lost 67 boys in Hitler's war? 67 from this small school. Not a day goes by that I don't think of Tiger Simons. Tiger came to us when some doctors in Regina asked if we could take a incorrigible kid whose mother was in a mental hospital and who'd been kicked out of every school and foster home because he was so hard to handle. Well, of course I said I'd have to ask the boys. And they said, well, send him. We'll see how tough he is. I have to admit, he was a brave little warrior. He took on Mother Edith. I never had the nerve to try that. When Mother Edith came into her room, Tiger put his feet up onto a desk and lit a cigarette. And when Mother Edith told him he couldn't do that in her room, he said no goddamn penguin was going to tell him what to do. Well, I always say never judge a guy at his worst. Well, Mother Edith was ready for him. She gave the older boys a nod and let them know that the halls needed scrubbing. Now, if you know anything about Notre Dame mud, you know there's plenty of it and it sticks. But don't be afraid of mud. Man's friend is the earth, the soil. Now, it's said that the culture of the Greeks faded because they moved too far away from the soil. Well, there's not much danger of that at Notre Dame. The older boys soon had the tough guy down on his knees, scrubbing away the mud. And when he got out of line, there was more mud to scrub, but not for long. See, the little mucker had never had a home. And when he realized that he was being accepted, well, there was a sudden change in him. Now, he was never much of a student, but I kicked his ass till he could leave here with a high school diploma. Huh? Well, the war was on. And soon, Tiger was back asking if I could pull some strings to get him in the Air Force. You see, all of his friends were joining, but he couldn't. He was only 17. Now, I knew how coaches got birth certificates altered, and it gave me an idea. Tiger didn't know if he'd ever been baptized, so I said, just between Tiger and me and God, I'd give him conditional baptism. If you are not already baptized, I baptize you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. And on the certificate, we put his age as 18. Well, on his last day of leave, before going overseas, he spent it at Notre Dame. And he used to write me from England about his adventures as a gunner on a Lancaster bomber and about the guys on his crew. Well, he went over Germany 17 times. And on January 2nd, 1944, he went to Berlin. Now, 26 planes didn't come back that night, and Tigers was one of them. He has no known grave, but his name is on a monument to all the missing. It's near Windsor, on a hill overlooking the Isle of Runnymede, where King John signed Magna Carta. Sergeant F.R. Simons. Now, in his will, he left the gratuities from his service, $3,000 to Notre Dame. There's not a day that goes by that I don't think of Tiger Simons. Now, you see, Tiger was a victim of Hitler's rotten ideas. Now, ideas are the measure of a civilization. The war machinery has yet to be invented which can withstand them. Now, that brings me to those busts of ancient Greeks that you'll see staring down at you in the library. You'll wonder, what the hell have those old geezers got to do with me? Well, when you leave Notre Dame, you'll know. Those heads contained three of the greatest minds we've ever had, and there was a personal connection between them. Now, let's start with Socrates. Socrates had a student named Plato, and Plato had a student named Aristotle. Now, there's a tag team for you. Let's talk about Socrates for a moment. Everybody knows that Socrates had a disagreeable wife, but few people know that he was a man of action. Hero of 2 wars fighting for Athens. So, as a philosopher, young men listened to Socrates, and he had a simple message for all of them. Know thyself. Know who you are, and you'll know what you can do. Now, St. Augustine would say, know what in you lies. Socrates' star pupil, Plato, he was a down-to-earth guy. It was Plato who said it was a wise man who invented beer. Nothing stuffy about Plato. He was the man that proclaimed the power of the idea. He said, dream your dream. Make it a great dream, and dream it greatly. Plato's Academy in Athens was the first university in Western civilization. And Plato's prized pupil, Aristotle, carried the wisdom of his master to a new dimension. Plato developed the idea, Aristotle developed thought. Now, what do you do with ideas? How do you test them? How do you organize them into a system? How do you organize knowledge of the natural world into a system? You see, Aristotle invented logic. And 700 years farther on, when St. Augustine was organizing the theology of the Christian church, he used the logic of Aristotle. So did Thomas Aquinas. So did Cardinal Newman. And so can you. You know, I like Aristotle's idea about classes. He didn't sit around in a closed room with the boys. They'd stroll through his shady glades in his academy, discussing and mulling over thoughts. Now, that wouldn't work here. I mean, if we had any shady glades in Wilcox, my gang would have chopped them up for firewood. Now, I've got a dirty ashtray here. I've asked time and again to have this cleaned up. But it's a good thing it wasn't, because it just reminds me of another thing that you've got to learn at Notre Dame. And that's that at Notre Dame you do as I say. Now, I say no smoking in the dormitories. But I smoke 4 packages of cigarettes a day. Hell, I didn't start smoking till I was 50. I'm trying to make up for lost time. Besides, I don't inhale. You know, some smart kid once said I didn't have time to inhale. I was blowing out all the time. Anyway, at Notre Dame, what I say is important. What I do isn't. Now, I say no alcohol on campus, but I'm a Murray, and Murray family tradition supersedes any rules of Notre Dame, even if I make them. I'll tell you a story about doing as I say. Once, not too long ago, I was strolling down the main street, clomping along the wooden sidewalks, waving to friends across the way, happy about some stranger who had sent a $100 bill. And as I was passing the two-story bank building that we'd converted into a dormitory, I happened to look up and there, on the windowsill of a second story, 4 bottles of beer. Well, damn it, I'd said no alcohol on campus. I was ready to charge up those stairs and raise hell, when suddenly one of those bottles crashed at my feet. Just blew up. Glass and beer all over the place. Wow. I was livid. I yelled up, "All right, whoever owned that bottle, get down here." Nobody came. So I yelled again, "I'm staying right here till whoever owned that beer bottle gets down here. I'm going to kick his ass." Well, soon a tall, skinny kid showed up, white as a sheet. I said, "What have you got to say for yourself? That bottle could have killed me. What have you got to say?" Well, you know, that kid glared right into my eyes and croaked out, "Père, if you live by the sword, you die by the sword." Well, I tried to be really mad, but I was laughing so hard I could barely stand up. You see, I was laughing because the little mucker had got the best of me, and also because he had mastered the prime objective of a Notre Dame education. He had learned to think innovatively. Now, thinking is fine any time, but let's not think in the same old tired ruts. When you leave Notre Dame, you will be able to think innovatively. You know, I've made up sort of a poem about what you should be able to do when you leave here, and Old Hounds had it made up into a scroll for me. It's called The Notre Dame Man. Of course, it works for women, too. Now, in it, I say that you will know how to apply your mind to whatever you wish to master. You'll be able to distinguish between what you know and what is merely your opinion. You'll be unlikely to make a million, because a million is not readily made except by those who sacrifice to its making the very things the Notre Dame graduate will have learned to value more than wealth. The world today is looking for men and women who are not for sale, who will stand for the right if the heavens totter and the earth reels, who have courage without shouting it, in whom the courage of everlasting life runs still, deep, and strong, who know their message and tell it, who know their place and fill it, who know their business and attend to it, who are not too lazy to work nor too proud to be poor, who are willing to eat what they have earned and wear what they have paid for, who are not ashamed to say no with emphasis. God is looking for them. He wants those who can unite together around a common faith, who can join hands in a common task, and who have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. God give us such as them. God give us such as you.
There'll always be masses, but unless the men that have the originality and the creativity of a high frequency, a high level, high vision, Unless these men come out and give the answers to the questions the mob are asking, if they refuse to answer, if you refuse to answer, then some slave mucker from the mob will find the answers, and then we're heading for frustration and disaster. That's summarizing pretty ruggedly what we're trying to do here at Notre Dame.